Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Berkman Klein Center. Throughout the year, we are honored to host top academics, industry experts, and tech professionals who are at the forefront of innovation. These distinguished speakers share their cutting-edge insights on AI, social media, digital rights, and more. Today, we're very excited to welcome three guests from civil society organizations that I'll introduce presently for our webinar today: Global Censorship Trends, Insights from Network Measurement, Circumvention, and Advocacy. Maria Zaino is a fellow at the Berkman Klein Center, where she is conducting a longitudinal study of the changing global internet censorship landscape. She's also a director of the Open Observatory of Network Interference, OONI, a nonprofit organization that provides free software tools and open data to empower the public to monitor and respond to internet censorship worldwide. She also serves on the board of directors of the Tor Project. Roger Dingledine is the co-founder and original developer for the Tor Project, a nonprofit organization that develops free and open source software used by millions worldwide for online anonymity, privacy, and censorship circumvention. Wearing one hat, Roger works with journalists and activists on many continents to help them understand and defend against the threats they face. Wearing another, he is a prominent researcher in the online anonymity field. Felicia Anthonio is the Keep It On campaign manager at Access Now, a global campaign of over 345 organizations that fight against internet shutdowns. Felicia leads the coalition's advocacy work, documenting and reporting shutdowns and engaging with diverse state and non-state actors to push for an end to shutdowns around the world. So thank you for joining us today. Each of the panelists is going to present for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to open up the webinar for questions. So if you can please hold your questions until the end, that would be great. And if you can submit your questions via the Q&A function, that's when they will be addressed as time allows. And you're welcome to address your question either to the group at large or to one of the panelists directly. And I will now turn the webinar over to Maria Zaino. Thanks, Maria.
Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Jess, for the introduction. Thank you, BKC, for hosting us. And thank you, Roger, Felicia, for joining for this discussion. And thank you to the, 58 people online who have joined us. We really appreciate your time and interest in joining this discussion. So yeah, my name is Maria. I've been working with OONI over the past decade, which is a free software project measuring internet censorship worldwide. I'm also a fellow here at BKC. And I will briefly share some censorship trends that we have observed over the past decade through OONI network measurement data. So first, I'd like to share that OONI is a project that was essentially born under the Tor Project back in 2012. And thanks to support from the Tor Project, we were able to grow and eventually spin off and create a nonprofit legal entity in Italy, but we work internationally. And essentially what we do is that we build free software tools called OONI, which are used by hundreds of thousands of people worldwide in order to run experiments on their networks to detect various forms of internet censorship. And in doing so, they automatically send these measurements to us, and we publish them as open data in real time. Thanks to our global community, we've had the opportunity to publish more than 2 billion network measurements from 2012 to date, covering more than 28,000 networks in 242 countries and territories worldwide. So arguably, this is the largest open data set on internet censorship worldwide, at least based on measurements collected from the edge of the network. And it is based on this data and this sort of unique insight on what is happening inside the network, on the network, that I'm going to share briefly some highlights. I think the first thing, and probably one of the most important things to highlight, is that what we have seen over the past years is the globalization and normalization of internet censorship worldwide. It started off as being a practice that was limited to authoritarian regimes, but these days what we're seeing is that literally almost every single country implements some form of network level censorship. What differs from country to country is what is blocked and the impact of the block and who is impacted by the block. And that varies over time, and often it is influenced by politics. As politics change, so does what is blocked. And what we're seeing is the spread of network level censorship to democracies worldwide. We're also seeing more and more censorship in Europe. For example, back in 2017, when Catalonia wanted to have an independence referendum, that was one of the first cases of politically motivated network level censorship that we observed in Europe when Spain started blocking access to referendum related websites. Currently, Spain is also blocking access to Women on Web, which is a reproductive rights website. They challenged the legality of this block in the courts. The courts instructed the block to be partially lifted, but yet we see that this block is still in place on many networks in Spain. In Italy, as another example, we're seeing the widespread blocking of websites suspected of distributing copyright material. This is implemented through the Piracy Shield, which is implementing these blocks in an automated way. And this has already resulted in several cases of collateral damage, unintentionally blocking access to services like Google Drive and Cloudflare and many others, and having more widespread impact. Last year, in May 2024, in New Caledonia, which is a French territory, access to TikTok was blocked. And across the EU, access to Russian news media websites have been blocked over the last years following the invasion of Ukraine. I think this is definitely noteworthy because this is probably one of the first cases of news media censorship implemented on the network level in a coordinated way across the EU. And while the justification for this is to combat disinformation and propaganda, at the same time, it also raises concerns about creating a precedent for further censorship in the EU. Overall, over the last years, we've observed an expansion in the types of contents that are blocked and the types of websites that are blocked. And what we tend to see is that some of the categories of websites that have a lot of public impact tend to be blocked the most and are increasingly blocked in more countries around the world. For example, we're increasingly observing the blocking of news media websites, political websites, human rights websites, circumvention tool websites in more and more countries around the world over the last years. And one of the other things that is probably the biggest highlights is that we tend to see that censorship is often politically motivated. Often we tend to observe a spike in censorship during elections and during protests. Particularly, we tend to observe the blocking of major social media platforms and then also the blocking of circumvention tools, likely in an attempt to stifle dissent, attempts to circumvent these blocks. And these sort of targeted, politically motivated blocks appear to be attempts to stifle dissent. Similarly, during sensitive political periods and transitions, we also tend to observe more internet censorship. For example, in Ethiopia, during the mass protests in 2016, we observed major blocking of social media platforms. But then when the government changed, then they lifted the blocks. Then when things became politically unstable again, we saw a resurgence of blocks. So we generally tend to observe over a long period of time a direct correlation between the escalation of intensification of political events and increased censorship. But in Myanmar as well, following the military coup in February 2021, we started to see much higher levels of internet censorship in comparison to the past. And in Venezuela as well, in moments where their political crisis is more intense, we tend to observe targeted blocking cases that target the opposition. But notably, we also tend to observe that blocks are often used as a weapon of war. For example, during border clashes in Armenia, between Armenia and Azerbaijan, we observed the blocking of TikTok in both countries. As soon as Russia invaded Ukraine, a few days later, we started to observe the blocking of international news media websites, but also the widespread blocking of independent news media websites in Russia. Today, almost all, if not all, independent news media websites are blocked in Russia. And this seems to be as part of a broader attempt to control the narrative surrounding the war. But often we tend to see that blocks go hand in hand with complete internet connectivity outages. Often what we'll see, especially during elections or during protests or even during political transitions, such as what you see here from Myanmar, we tend to observe first the blocking of major social media platforms, then a complete internet connectivity shutdown, and then when internet access is resumed again, then they continue blocking access to major social media platforms and VPNs and other circumvention tools. What you see here from the charts is basically some graphs from our study in Myanmar following the military coup in February 2021, where on the one hand, they implemented nightly internet outages, almost like internet curfews, where like clockwork every night, they would shut down access to the internet during very specific times. And this lasted every night for 72 consecutive days. But when internet access was resumed, they would block access to major social media platforms. And even though they stopped these shutdowns after 72 days, they're still blocking access to this day to major social media platforms. And they're blocking access to a wide range of VPNs. And actually, over the last years, the VPN blocking has really intensified. So what this suggests, this pattern that we're not only seeing in Myanmar, but we've also observed this in many other countries, is that internet connectivity outages tend to be relatively short-lived in terms of duration, while the targeted blocking of social media and circumvention tools tend to be more long-lived. This suggests that this is a sort of a strategic attempt to maximize the political impact by through these long-term targeted blocks while minimizing the cost of internet connectivity shutdowns. What we're also seeing is that a lot of the discrimination and a lot of the social and political hierarchies in the offline world are also being consolidated and transferred onto the online world as well through network level censorship. We're seeing the blocking of LGBTIQ websites in numerous countries around the world, especially in countries where LGBTIQ rights are not protected. We're also seeing the blocking of ethnic and religious minority group websites in countries where they have historically been subject to prosecution and discrimination. And we're also starting to see the blocking of reproductive rights websites in many countries. This sort of suggests that censorship is used as a tool to reinforce the status quo and to silence those who are already marginalized, which just exacerbates existing inequalities. Overall, there's like two types of blocks that we observe, intermittent and permanent blocks. Intermittent blocks are reactionary short-term blocks in response to very specific events such as elections, protests, or even exams. And these are targeted cases of censorship, which will affect very specific websites or apps. And because they have a short duration, they tend to have lower political and economic cost. Permanent blocks, on the other hand, are much more systemic. They're long-term. They're based on ideologies. They're based on laws. They're based on policies. They're based on culture. And so usually they will impact a much broader range of websites and tools. Usually they will target all or most or hundreds or thousands of websites that fall under a specific category. So for example, in a country where LGBTIQ rights are not protected, then maybe you will see in that country the blocking of thousands or hundreds of LGBTIQ websites. And so the cost there obviously is much higher because they're much more long-term, but at the same time, there's sort of that legal backing that makes it harder to challenge them sometimes. And technically, what we're also seeing over the years is a sort of a rise of TLS-based censorship. TLS is a protocol for encrypting the connection. And on the one hand, it makes sense that we're seeing censorship being implemented in this way, but this is also a much more advanced and sophisticated way of implementing censorship in comparison to other techniques. What is really concerning is that this way of implementing censorship is much less transparent in comparison to other ways of implementing censorship. So for example, in the past, we would commonly see block pages, which were web pages that would clearly inform the user that access to a website is intentionally blocked. Whereas if access to a website is now blocked by means of TLS interference, the user will just see a connection reset error or a connection timeout error. So it's very hard to know if access is intentionally blocked or if they're unable to access it due to network failures or other reasons. And usually to implement the sort of TLS-based censorship, usually you do this through the use of deep packet inspection technology. And given that we're seeing censorship implemented in this way in more and more countries around the world, this inevitably raises the question as to whether this suggests that there's a sort of proliferation of the censorship technology industry in more countries around the world. At the same time, we're also observing an arms race affecting both privacy and circumvention tech. In recent years, with the introduction of encrypted DNS, we reported back in 2020 attempts to block DNS over TLS endpoints in Iran. This intensified in September 2022 during the major anti-government Mahsa Amini protests, where we started to observe increased blocking of encrypted DNS, targeting many more endpoints, also targeting many DOH endpoints, and also many popular ones. In response to this, we rolled out a DNS check experiment for measuring the blocking of encrypted DNS. Quite similarly, in recent months, we started to observe that Russia started to block access to encrypted client hello, ECH, which is really concerning because ECH, on the one hand, is very promising for fighting back against TLS censorship, but we are seeing that in some countries they're starting to block it. So that's also why we rolled out an ECH check experiment. And in all of this, there really is an arms race with circumvention technologies, and I know that Roger will also talk more about this. In recent years, as mentioned before, we've seen increased blocking of more and more circumvention tool websites and circumvention tools in more countries around the world, possibly in an attempt to prevent people from circumventing some other blocks are in place, such as social media blocks or news media blocks that they don't want people to access. And in all of this, I really need to mention the rise of national intranets. So this is the ultimate form of network level censorship, is the most extreme form, because essentially what we're talking about is countries that are blocking access to most websites and international websites and apps, and trying to have more control over their national infrastructure and implement censorship in that way. And what we're seeing in recent years is more countries starting to adopt intranets, but also the intranets themselves starting to become much more much more controlled environments inside them. Such as in Iran, for example, where they've really over the last 2-3 years, they've blocked access to most services, international services, and so really consolidating the national information network. And all of this suggests that in a way we're sort of transitioning towards censorship, not just being a policy, but being baked into the architecture of the internet itself. And I think this is extremely concerning because this also comes at a time when we have the global rise of authoritarianism in more and more countries around the world. And as we see the rise of authoritarianism, we're also seeing that the nature and the architecture of the internet in many countries around the world is increasingly becoming more closed and more controlled. So this raises really big concerns in terms of human rights, and I think it highlights that we really need to do more, both on the network measurement side in terms of documenting internet censorship, but also in terms of circumvention, building tools for circumvention, supporting groups like the Tor Project, and of course supporting and joining initiatives like the Keep It On campaign that Felicia will talk about to fight internet censorship and shutdowns around the world. So if you're interested in getting involved with OONI and with network measurement efforts, there are many ways you can get involved. You can run our software OONI Probe, which you can install on mobile and desktop platforms. You can contribute websites for testing. And of course, you can analyze OONI data and do your own independent reporting on internet censorship. Thank you. And I'll pass it on to Roger.
Beautiful. Thank you. Okay. I've got a couple of minutes to talk about a bunch of other things. Hopefully my slides are up. Let me know if they're not. So Tor is a nonprofit that works on privacy tools, and part of the message that I'm going to try to get through today is privacy and censorship resistance are more connected and more related than you might think. So the part of the interesting thing about Tor is that we have a volunteer group of relays around the world where you pass your Tor traffic through 3 of these relays. And part of the goal of decentralizing it, part of the goal of not having a central point is privacy. And we'll get to how that connects to the censorship side soon. But the privacy point is really important in that there are a bunch of centralized privacy projects out there. A lot of the VPN providers, for example, try to argue that they are all about privacy. And part of the challenge that we see in the centralization is it always starts with, we promise we're not going to look at your traffic. Okay, actually, we do look at your traffic. We promise we're not going to write down what we see. Okay, actually, we
Roger.
do log everything. Whoop, I've got a,
Sorry
yes,
to interrupt you, but
yes.
I think folks can't actually see the slides yet.
Oh, okay, beautiful, thank you. I can see the slides. I will try harder to share screen, share window. How about this time?
Success.
Success. Okay, great. Okay,
Thank you.
hi everybody. And I'm going to, are they still up even now?
All good.
All good. Okay, great. Okay, Thank you for interrupting. So yeah, the first step is Tor is a nonprofit, and part of the goal is we split things across. We split the traffic across multiple relays, so there's no central point that gets to learn both who you are and what you're doing. And compared to the VPN world, it always starts with we promise not to look at your traffic. We promise not to log. Okay, we do log. We promise not to tell anybody what we see. Okay, of course we answer subpoenas from any government out there. And part of the challenge there is the architecture of those centralized systems means it comes down to privacy by promise. We're in Switzerland, therefore we're safe, rather than privacy by architecture or privacy by design, which is the technical approach to how you build the system is how you provide the safety. So the reason I mention that is Tor has a lot of different users using it for a lot of different reasons. A lot of our users are individual citizens in Western or authoritarian countries out there that are using it for privacy, for security, for censorship, reachability. So these reachability users are some of the users, but I think a lot of the reasons why people use Tor overlap. It's not simply I want privacy versus I want to get around censorship. They're more connected than you might think. So one way of looking at that, we have a lot of users in Iran these days, and the average Tor user in Iran is not a political dissident trying to take down the system. They're a person who's trying to get to Facebook, and Iran blocked Facebook. And the fact that they're using it in order to get to their pictures of kittens on webcomics or whatever people use on the internet these days, that ordinariness is a security property for the rest of the Tor users. Because yes, there are some folks in Iran who are trying to change things from a political perspective, but the fact that there are so many other people using the tools that are not doing it from that perspective are part of why it's safe. So another way of looking at that is are you using your censorship tool for reachability, or are you using your censorship tool for safety? And a lot of people in the censorship circumvention space are focusing mostly on reachability, which is a great first step. But in the Tor world, we argue that you need to think about both the reachability and the safety side. If you're just thinking about reachability, then things can go wrong. And for example, again, using the Iran case, back in the early protests in 2007, 2008, there were a lot of people who were saying they just started blocking things like Facebook. I just need some way to get around the blocking. My government is stupid. They don't know how the internet works. They're not watching anything. And a lot of those people turned out to, it's hard to detect when it shifts to, yes, actually they did get a lot better at watching. And yes, they are making lists of who's going where. So a lot of the people who started off saying, I just need some open proxy or some tool to get around the censorship, ended up regretting the fact that they'd been so open with what they were doing. So part of the argument is this whole censorship circumvention thing and this whole privacy thing need to go together. Okay, so that's some background. A lot of people simply use Tor to get around the censorship. In the Tor world, we talk all about the censorship arms race, and we mean when they try to block Tor and then we try to unblock Tor and so on. But one of the important points is most places in the world don't block Tor by website or by protocol. And that means that a lot of people simply install Tor browser, and now they're getting around their local censorship. So here's a list from a couple of years ago of the top 10 countries for where people are when they're using Tor. And we can have the awkward conversation this year of, haha, which of these count as authoritarian regimes this year? But there's a wide variety of countries on this list. So a lot of the internet freedom funding world starts off saying, here are the bad countries in the world, and these are the ones where you need to get around the censorship. But the reality is it's a lot more mixed together than that. Maria had some great examples of internet censorship in Spain. And again, it's not just the censorship. It's if I want to look at an abortion website, maybe it's censored or maybe it's surveilled. And in either case, I want to be able to have some safety there. Okay, so phase one of the censorship arms race is they block websites like TikTok or YouTube or Twitter and so on, and we install Tor browser to get around them. Phase two is they start trying to block Tor, the program called Tor itself, and at that point, we need some way to transform the Tor traffic into something that the censors are willing to let through. And there are two pieces to that particular cat and mouse game. The first piece is blocking by IP address, where they try to block pieces of the Tor infrastructure so that when your Tor software tries to reach them, you can't connect. And the second piece is that they try to block protocols. That Maria was talking about blocking TLS in various ways. So they try to figure out what your protocol is and prevent you from speaking protocols like Tor. So the two ways around that are to send your traffic to IP addresses that aren't associated with your infrastructure, and to transform your traffic into some protocol that they're willing to let through. So one interesting case study from a couple of years ago, Russia ended up blocking a bunch of different pieces of Tor, including connecting directly into the Tor network. And one of the pluggable transports, one of the ways that we have for transforming your Tor traffic is called Snowflake. It transforms your traffic into basically video chat, sort of like the protocol that you're using right now to watch me talk. And we had a lot of new Snowflake users in Russia during that particular blocking event, where they blocked some parts of Tor, so a lot of people switched over to using Snowflake. And at the time we were thinking, wow, awesome, we've got 6,000 new users, this is great, look at the 6,000 people that we're helping. And that turned out to be this tiny little blip in early December at the beginning of this graph, where yes, there was blocking in Russia and a lot of people use Snowflake, but then later on, the event in Iran where a woman was killed by the police for not wearing the proper clothing the proper way. Later on in Iran, there were a lot of new Snowflake users, and over the course of a weekend, I think at that point we were the #1 app in the Google App Store in Iran and the #2 app in the Google App Store in Iran for that 24-hour period. So there's a lot of more pieces we can talk about in the case study side, but I want to take a step back. And a lot of people look at censorship on the internet and they say, oh, China, Iran, Russia, and so on. But actually, a lot more countries censor than you might imagine. Australia is famous for rolling out censorship a while ago. England censors, Sweden censors, and part of the challenge there is when you're talking to countries like China and you're saying censoring the internet shows that you're doing something wrong, maybe you're not as democratic as you claim to be, then they point to Australia and say, well, Australia censors, England censors, we're just keeping our citizens safe, just like you are. Why are you picking on us? So part of the challenge there that Maria also mentioned, it's not just that these Western countries censor, it's that they use it, they do it using tools from California corporations or Italian corporations that are designed to help oppression. And maybe they start off helping oppression against employees inside the Boeing internet or something, but then they get reused by Myanmar and Australia and so on. So a brief pitch for EFF running a campaign to get more people at universities running Tor relays. If you are at a university, I'd love to chat with you about that. Couple of lessons to wrap up. So I mentioned the reachability versus safety. One of the key points to think about, censorship implies surveillance, meaning in order to deploy the censorship, they need to look at what websites you're going to, what protocols you're speaking, in order to decide whether to allow you to get there. So censorship and surveillance are more connected than you might at first think. When we're trying to explain privacy to people, they always start off with, well, I don't need that. I don't live in a country like that. So part of the challenge, we realized there was this phrase, over thereistan, where you talk to Americans and they're like, oh, I'm glad I don't live in over thereistan. So it's the censorship thing and this privacy thing are a bigger deal for more countries than just over theristan. And I'm a little bit over time, so I'm going to leave the rest of this for the Q&A side. I guess the last thought is there's a lot of academic research in the censorship privacy side of things, and there's a conference coming up soon in July in Washington, D.C., and on the internet free and open communications on the internet. So with that, I will pass it to Felicia.
Is my screen okay? Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Maria and Roger, for making my job very easy. You've definitely covered most of the issues that we see under the Keep It On campaign, and also as partners and members of the coalition. So I will just run through some of the advocacy strategies that we use as a coalition to fight back against internet shutdowns, as we call it. All right, so Keep It On, for those who are not familiar, it's a global campaign and coalition hosted by Access Now, which is
Felicia,
an international. Hi.
sorry to interrupt.
Oh,
Just so folks
Yeah,
can
yeah,
see a little bit better, can you share? Yeah, thank you so much.
okay. All right, is that okay?
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, awesome. So the Keep It On campaign and coalition is hosted by Access Now, which is an international human rights organization, and we defend and extend digital rights of people and communities at risk. The coalition was started in 2016, and we currently have over 345 organizations as members, and it's become the world's leading coalition against internet shutdown. So when we launched the campaign, we also needed to be guided by certain things to keep us on track in our mission to push back against internet shutdowns. And so we came up with this definition during the launch of the campaign. And so for the Keep It On coalition, we focused on advocating and documenting internet shutdowns, which refer to the instances where governments or those in authority or even warring parties intentionally disrupt internet connectivity or electronic communication. In this case, that would be social media platforms, rendering them inaccessible or effectively unusable for specific population. And also it's often imposed to exert control over the flow of information. And you could also call internet shutdowns blackouts or kill switches or network disruptions, depending on what is happening, or you can use that interchangeably. And then, of course, we've seen governments also targeting internet access by slowing down internet speed, which is called throttling, making it really difficult for people to be able to use the internet. Just to provide some concrete figures to show that this is not something that happens in isolation, but we actually have documented instances of shutdowns being weaponized or normalized by various actors around the world. And so just quick snapshots, 2024 was a very bad year for advocacy because we documented 296 incidents of shutdown. And this is not to say that civil society is not doing a lot in response to this growing threats to fundamental human rights, but rather governments are also becoming really emboldened to suppress the rights of people and resulting in more and more people being impacted and suffering from the consequences of these decisions. And you can see at the bottom of my slide, I say that one shutdown is one too many. And so no shutdown is less impactful or less dangerous for any community. And so together with OONI, with Tor, and shutdowns that happen in all corners of the world where it's possible, and we document this and raise awareness about them. These are some of the countries that we saw and documented shutdowns. See Myanmar here. Maria mentioned that since the of shutdowns in 2024. I will move to the triggers. So triggers simply mean instances or incidents that are likely to have a government disrupt the internet. And so you've heard Maria mentioned elections, protests, and other incidents. But when you look at the slide, you see that conflict-related shutdowns is becoming a big and this is normally done in the form of cutting fiber optic cables or destroying power and electricity infrastructure, also using jamming devices. We've also seen warring parties taking over internet offices of ISP with an example being in Sudan. And then, of course, we've also seen hacker groups deploying
Felicia?
the other triggers that we documented in 2024. And so I'll be sharing my slides for those who are interested as well to dig deeper into the findings of our reports. All right, so how do we push back against internet shutdowns? I've mentioned awareness raising. It's really important for people to actually understand that or be aware that a shutdown is happening and also equip them with the necessary tools. We've mentioned OONI. So with OONI, people are able to use that to test and run measurements to detect what platforms are being targeted, for instance. When it comes to circumvention, people would go to Tor to see how they are able to navigate the shutdowns. And so under the campaign, we have these relations with these key partners, as well as the coalition members, where we document, raise awareness about what is going on, and also engage with the various actors to see how we can support communities that are impacted by internet shutdowns. We also work with partners like Cloudflare and IODA to be able to track and document shutdowns, mostly targeting the internet, to be able to use that to inform our advocacy and hold perpetrators accountable. Given the nature of shutdowns and its impact on people and other aspects of our life, we also engage with various governments, that is governments that we see as friends of the coalition or governments that are actually shutting down the internet or have the tendency to shut down the internet. Depending on the scenario, we tend to engage these governments to push back. We do also work with regional and international bodies to be able to inform adoption of policies or resolutions denouncing the use of internet shutdown. We also have used strategic litigation in various parts of the world, and with some successes in countries like Togo, Pakistan, Zimbabwe, Indonesia, Nigeria, Zambia, and Sudan, where the courts ruled in favor of civil society that took their governments to court for shutting down the internet. And then under the Keep It On campaign through Access Now's Digital Rights Litigators Network, we are able to mobilize efforts and to also provide strategic guidance and contribute to putting together amicus briefs to be able to educate judges that are new to cases of shutdowns, so they are able to understand exactly what we are talking about and the impact that has on human rights. And then, of course, there's the need for us to support people that are impacted by shutdowns or targeted with shutdowns with digital security. And so through our digital security helpline, we are able to provide the support to people from actual, like, let's say, going through people's recommending tools that would enable people's security, what VPNs are you supposed to use, what circumvention tools should you resort to during a shutdown, so that in your quest to come back online, you don't end up also endangering your digital security and even your physical safety. And so we engage in these strategies to push back. And then, of course, we are able to also support grassroots advocacy groups with grants from our advocacy, from our grants program, so that people can continue to replicate what is the campaign is about, and to also reach authorities and push back. I'm just about wrapping up, and so I just want to recap some of the lessons I've learned while working on the Keep It On campaign. And from the beginning, I told you that we did adopt a definition right from the launch of the campaign to guide our advocacy and to make our goal clear. That has not changed. Shutdowns are bad, and we continue to push back against them through our advocacy. We also have a mailing list where we coordinate and mobilize support in response to shutdown. And it's open to civil society groups working on diverse issues, including human rights and digital rights, to be able to also exchange information and to coordinate in pushing back during internet shutdowns. As I also indicated, I think it's important to have in every global campaign, and given how shutdowns are spreading, it's important to have like the tools and resources readily available for communities that are new to this. Because every year we tend to see new countries joining the shame list of governments that are normalizing the use of shutdowns. And so we have, for instance, branding toolkits for Keep Coalition members to be able to run their own campaigns and to mobilize support on the mailing list I mentioned earlier. What also has kept this campaign going, I would say, is some keywords, including solidarity, inclusiveness, coordination, and of course, respect for differences. And I would just use an example, like not every advocacy response makes sense for all shutdowns and for all shutdowns. And so in some cases, we have to revise the strategy that we use to be able to advocate against a shutdown happening, and also ensure that people and partners that are in certain countries are also kept or are safe from the advocacy that we are doing, because we know how advocacy can also end up putting partners on the ground in trouble with the authorities. And so we do adapt various strategies to be able to do this. And then, of course, it's important for us to physically meet to discuss strategies and just share our experiences as a coalition. And then also we do virtual meetings and also take advantage of events that are organized, including RightsCon, there's Faith Africa, there's Global Gathering, there's DRIFT and other spaces where we meet to mobilize and also just encourage ourselves to keep going. Well, there are some successes I would want to share, and I have included them as well, but just to say that we've been able to get authorities to reverse shutdowns that have been imposed, with an example in Mauritius, and this year we got the South Sudanese government to also lift an initial directive to shut down social media for 90 days in the country after, I think it was after 3 days when we did call them out and put out statements denouncing that decision. It was reversed after that. And so I think on the other side, we've seen that the situation is getting really terrible, but civil society remains resilient, and we continue to track shutdowns that happen across the globe. And then, of course, we continue to strengthen partnerships with the Keep It On coalition members, as well as partners that support our advocacy efforts against internet shutdown. Yeah, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you to each of you. Appreciate it. We do have some questions coming in that I can share. So let's get going, shall we? Let's see. We have a question from BKC affiliate. I see Julie Owono, who says, "Thank you so much for this fascinating presentation and work. Censorship, measurement, and analysis is foundational for organizations advocating for free expression online. I have a question regarding the criminalization of censorship circumvention tools, which can have a chilling effect for users of these tools and organizations supporting them. How can stakeholders strategize to advocate against that concerning regulatory trend?"
Yeah, so I'll jump in with a little bit, and maybe the other two panelists can answer after that. In a lot of cases, so a lot of people are worried that tools like Tor are illegal to use in various places, but for the most part, they aren't. For the most part, there aren't laws against using tools like Tor, even in places like Russia. In practice, they maybe try to block them by protocol. And part of the challenge that OONI sees is sometimes they show you a block page, meaning they admit that they're blocking it. And in other cases, it doesn't work. And nobody explains why it doesn't work. So there are a bunch of technical mechanisms where they make tools like this not work so well to discourage people from using them. But that's mainly the arms race that we've seen, rather than going about it from the legal side. And I mean, to be fair, in the US, we have an infinite number of laws and everything's illegal if you look at it carefully enough. And that's true all around the world. Even in China, they have laws that they can point to if they want to. But we haven't seen this primarily be in the legal law side of things. But I'll let the other two panelists jump in if they want to.
Thanks, Roger. And thank you, Julie, for the excellent question, for the very important question. I do agree with Roger that sometimes, yeah, I guess in many ways it's also a trade-off, right? Because like in many cases, like maybe they might be able to justify, going after specific people for many different reasons beyond specific laws that specifically criminalize the use of VPNs. Maybe it might be under broad national security reasons and so on. So I think a lot of this has to do with like a sort of cost-benefit analysis, or a threat model analysis, which is specific to every individual in the specific situation that they're in. There are places, for example, like in Tanzania and elsewhere, where they're increasingly starting to vaguely and broadly like criminalize the use of VPNs. However, to your question, Julie, I think on the one hand, well, I should probably start by saying I'm probably not the best person because I don't personally do litigation, but I do think there's definitely an opportunity for more collaboration, more collaboration, more pushback for more litigation cases. I think international organizations such as Access Now do play and can continue to play a prominent role in raising public awareness on an international level and helping to exercise a sort of pressure. But beyond collaborations on litigation cases, both locally and internationally, I think also generally like having more public awareness raising in relation to the importance and the utility of circumvention tools, sort of highlighting how these tools are important for so many different aspects of daily life, and therefore that's in a way blocking that they're not used to access illegal content, or that they're not necessarily used to access illegal content, that they have many other properties that are fundamental for human rights and for societies. So I think having more public awareness in relation to that, I think would definitely be helpful. And broadly speaking, more collaborations. But I do think that's an important question, Julian. Thank you for raising it. I'd be happy to discuss further and also hear from Felicia.
We have another sort of related question, related legal question. Sean asks, what legal and ethical frameworks exist to hold governments accountable when they impose internet shutdowns, especially during conflicts, protests, or elections? Also, has taking governments to court resulted in a decrease of internet shutdowns?
I can respond to the question, and Maria and Roger, feel free to jump in as well. So from our advocacy perspective, we've cited various frameworks, including the International Covenant on People on Civil and Political Rights. We've also cited the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Of course, we've also used national constitutions to challenge provisions in national constitutions to challenge shutdowns that have been imposed by governments. In terms of accountability, it's really difficult, but there's been instances where, let's say the African Union, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights has adopted resolutions that denounce shutdowns, but then once a member state goes against the shutdown, because it's not legally binding, nothing is, or no consequence is faced by such states. And then, of course, I think we've also had like the UN Secretary General, for instance, and other experts denounce shutdowns. But again, because these are not binding, it's really difficult to hold authorities accountable. But that is not to say that, as I indicated, we've taken governments to court, and I haven't seen a reduction in the number of shutdowns, as I clearly indicated. But then some governments that we've taken to court, for instance, let's say Zambia, we were able to get their shutdown to be lifted. Like civil society got their shutdown to be lifted as it was in place, which was really like an important win for us. And of course, we've also engaged with various actors, and the civil society on the ground is alert, given that the shutdown happened. But I will not be able to say shutdowns have reduced, because clearly they haven't. But then governments are finding ways and means of imposing, let's say, targeting social media instead of blanketly shutting down the internet, and finding other ways to restrict rights. But all the same, these have serious consequences on people's rights on the ground. Yeah, this is what I have to say.
We have a question related to something that came up kind of before the webinar started about the censorship industry, kind of as its own economy. So this is from Eduardo. I think the issue of the booming of the censorship industry is particularly important to reflect on, since this is an industry mostly based in the global north. What strategies can we use to shed a bit more light on these actors and the business models that are developed in countries with high levels of internet freedom, but that have huge impacts on people's freedoms across the globe?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. I know that Maria has answers for it also, so I'll be brief. So it's not just the censorship industry; it's the surveillance industry, and they overlap. So check out some of the cool stuff that Citizen Lab has been doing on highlighting these things. But yeah, the question of how do we as a society grapple with the fact that we are building oppression tools and selling them to dictators, and this is capitalism. That's an excellent question and a very frustrating one. I'll let Maria pick it up.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with Roger, and thank you, Eduardo, for raising this important question. Yeah, so in terms of like the censorship slash surveillance industry, on the one hand, there are organizations like Privacy International who have been doing investigations specifically on this for more than for a very long time, since more than a decade ago. They have published a lot of materials, brochures from trade shows and things like that that provide insights into alarms capabilities. But generally speaking, tracking and investigating surveillance industries and censorship industries is quite hard because a lot of this is happening, sort of behind closed doors. It's not very easy to access this type of information and to investigate this. But that said, with OONI specifically, one thing that we're doing is basically analyzing the TLS handshake information from our measurements, and then through that, we will be able to fingerprint specific devices that are used on different networks, and we're hoping that will help to shed light on, in cases we're able to fingerprint the specific devices, shed light on what types of technologies from which companies are deployed where around the world. However, this is a new sort of analysis that we're implementing. We're hoping to publish a study based on this within the next year. So keep an eye out for that. But in any case, our study will be openly documented as always. The data is all open, so hopefully others can similarly apply similar studies to examine this further. And yeah, generally speaking, I think the more of us, the more researchers, can get involved with trying to address this question and investigate this, the better, I think, for sure. And at the same time, I think there's opportunity for collaboration on many different fronts. On the one hand, on the more technical side, in terms of doing the sort of network measurement investigations. On the other hand, maybe journalists have an opportunity to do investigative research into this. Advocates can help raise awareness and exercise pressure to such companies. There are many different roles, I think, that different actors in society can play.
Yeah, I don't think that we can solve it from a legal side because of the phrase dual use technologies. Like these tools argue that they're helpful for employers, making sure their employees can't do instant messaging at work or things like that. So I think we need to solve it from the social side, and that's part of why we have failed to solve it.
Agreed.
Well, thank you all so much. That's time for us, but we really, really appreciate all of you being with us. And thank you so much to Maria and Roger and Felicia for being with us and sharing your insights with us today. Thank you to all of you in the Sky Lounge, as we call it at BKC. We do have another event tomorrow at 12:30 p.m. Eastern if you'd like to join us again. And thanks again. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.